Add up what you've spent on annuals over the last 10 years. For a lot of folks on a fixed income, it's well over $1,000, all of it dead by Halloween. Meanwhile, the woman 3 doors down planted her flowers once, a decade ago, and her yard has bloomed every summer since without costing her another. Salvia, Roseanne geranium, all flowering from June to frost. She's not a better gardener than you. She just knows which flowers keep their promises. Here are the ones that bloom all summer, every summer, from a single planting. If you'd asked anyone on that block about her 10 years ago, they'd have told you she just had a green thumb. They had no idea the whole thing came down to a handful of plant choices. Every one of these flowers earns its spot the same way. It comes back on its own each spring, and then it blooms for months instead of weeks, so you get the long color without the yearly trip to the register. An annual gives you one summer for your money. These give you summer after summer, decade after decade, off the same plants. So let's walk through the 11 I would put in the ground first. Number 11, threadleaf coreopsis, the variety called moonbeam. Start with the one in that neighbor's yard, because threadleaf coreopsis is about as honest a long bloomer as exists. The moonbeam variety throws out a haze of soft, pale yellow flowers over fine ferny foliage, and it keeps at it from early summer straight through to fall. The Missouri Botanical Garden lists threadleaf coreopsis among its long-blooming perennials, and it is hardy across roughly zones 3 through 9, so it shrugs off cold winters that would finish off a tray of annuals. For a single pot of $3 or $4, you get a plant that returns every spring and flowers for the better part of the growing season. What makes it bloom so long is that it does not stop to set seed the way many flowers do. It just keeps pushing fresh blooms. You can give it a light shear in midsummer to tidy it up and encourage another flush, but you are not out there deadheading every single spent flower the way you would with a fussier plant, because the flowers are tiny and numerous, and the plant carries itself. The planting tip is to put it in full sun and well-drained soil and then leave it alone, because rich, wet ground is the one thing it dislikes. The payoff beyond the color is the bees. Coreopsis is alive with small pollinators all summer, so that pale yellow haze is doing real work for your whole garden while it earns its keep. Number 10, Roseanne geranium. If you want one plant that genuinely flowers from early summer to frost, this is the one I would point you to first. Roseanne is a hardy geranium, not the red annual geranium you buy in a pot at the big box store every May. It makes mounds of violet blue, saucer-shaped flowers with a pale center, and it blooms longer than almost anything else you can grow. Southern Living includes Roseanne in its roundup of perennials that bloom for months, and it has earned that reputation honestly. It is hardy across roughly zones 5 through 8, and a single plant spreads into a sprawling, weaving carpet that knits through the rest of the border. The reason it blooms so long is that Roseanne is sterile. It cannot set seed, so the plant pours all that energy into making flower after flower instead, right up until the cold shuts it down. That sterility is also why it needs almost no deadheading. You are not snapping off spent blooms to keep it going, because it never gets the signal to quit. The planting tip is to give it room to roam, since one plant can spill 3 feet wide, and let it weave between sturdier neighbors that hold it up. The payoff is the sheer length of the show. There is no other perennial I know of that you can plant once and count on for that many months of continuous blue. Number 9, Veronica, also called Speedwell. Speedwell gives you something a lot of long bloomers do not, and that is vertical lines. It sends up slender spikes packed with tiny flowers in blue, purple, pink, or white, and those spikes stand straight up out of a tidy clump of foliage. The bloom starts in early summer, and if you snip the spent spikes off, it pushes a second and even third round well into the season. Hardy across roughly zones 3 through 8, it is a tough, cold, hardy plant that comes back reliably and asks very little of you once it settles in. Speedwell holds its bloom because of that reblooming habit. Each spike opens its flowers from the bottom up over a stretch of weeks, and once a spike is finished, removing it tells the plant to send up more. That is the one small chore here, and it is a pleasant one, just clipping a few faded spikes every couple of weeks. The planting tip is full sun and decent drainage, and to plant it toward the front or middle of a bed where those upright spikes red clearly against mounding plants around them. The payoff is contrast. So many summer perennials are rounded and bushy that those vertical blue spikes give your garden a shape it would otherwise be missing, and the bees work them hard. Number 8, garden phlox. Garden phlox is the plant that makes a summer border smell like summer. It grows into tall, upright clumps, topped with big domed clusters of fragrant flowers in pink, white, lavender, and red, and it carries that bloom through the heart of the season, roughly midsummer into early fall. Hardy across roughly zones 3 through 8, A single clump comes back larger every year and can run for decades in the same spot. This is the kind of plant your grandmother grew along a fence, and it is still earning its place in gardens for the same reasons it did then. Phlox keeps blooming for a good long stretch when you give it a little air. It flowers for weeks on its own, and snapping off the faded flower heads before they set seed nudges it to send out smaller side blooms and stretches the show further. The one honest caution is mildew. In a crowded, stuffy spot, the leaves can go dusty and gray late in the season, so the planting tip that matters most is spacing. Give each clump room and morning sun so the foliage dries quickly, and look for the mildew-resistant varieties many nurseries now carry. The payoff is twofold. You get that sweet evening fragrance drifting across the yard, and you get butterflies and hummingbird moths working the clusters at dusk. Number 7. Agastache, sometimes sold as hyssop or hummingbird mint. Agastache is the one to plant if you want hummingbirds parked in your yard all summer. It sends up tall, loose spikes of tubular flowers in shades of orange, pink, purple, and blue, and the foliage smells of mint or licorice when you brush it. It blooms from midsummer until frost, and it is built for heat and dry spells, which makes it a gift in a hot, low-water yard. Hardiness depends on the type, but many are reliable across roughly zones 5 through 10, so check the tag for your area before you buy. The long bloom comes from those spikes producing new flowers over a very long window, and from the plant's deep tolerance for tough conditions. It does not sulk in heat the way softer flowers do, it just keeps going. Deadheading is optional rather than required, because the plant blooms freely on its own. The planting tip is sharp drainage, full stop. Agastache hates wet feet in winter, and far more plants are lost to soggy ground than to cold, so plant it high and dry. The payoff is the wildlife. Hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies all chase the nectar, and because it tolerates drought so well, you get all that motion and color without standing out there with a hose. Number 6. Coneflower. Echinacea, the purple coneflower, is one of those plants that performs better the less you fuss over it. It throws up sturdy stems topped with daisy-like flowers, usually purple-pink with a bristly orange cone in the center, and it blooms for a long stretch through midsummer and beyond. Hardy from roughly zone 3 all the way to zone 9, it thrives in lean, poor soil where pampered perennials refuse to grow. A nursery pot runs about $4 to $7, and once it is established, it is one of the most dependable flowers in the whole garden. Coneflower blooms a good long while on its own, and you can extend it by snapping off the earliest spent flowers to keep new buds coming. If you stop deadheading toward the end of the season and let those spiky cones stand, they dry into seed heads that feed goldfinches right through the fall and winter, so the plant gives you a long summer bloom and then a second act as free bird food. The planting tip is to resist the urge to baby it. Rich soil and heavy feeding produce floppy, weak stems, while lean ground produces sturdy, upright plants covered in flowers. The payoff is butterflies all summer and finches all winter, off one tough plant. Number 5. Reblooming daylily. A daylily flower lasts only one day, which sounds like a strike against it, until you understand how these plants work. A single established clump opens a fresh wave of new blooms day after day for weeks, and the reblooming varieties go further, sending up a second round of flower stalks later in the season so the color keeps coming. The classic reblooming type, called Stella d'Oro, flowers from early summer into fall, and daylilies in general are hardy across a huge range, roughly zones 3 through 9. You can buy a single fan for a few dollars, and within 2 seasons it becomes a clump you can divide and spread for free. The long show comes from the sheer number of buds. Each scape carries a string of them that open in succession, and the rebloomers simply produce more scapes after the first flush. Snapping off the spent stalks tidies the plant and encourages that rebloom, but even left untouched, a daylily clump pumps out flowers for a long stretch. The planting tip is that they are nearly unkillable, taking full sun, part shade, heavy clay, drought, and road salt without complaint. So plant them along a driveway or a hot fence line where pickier things would fail. The payoff is the dividing. That one fan turns into 5 or 6 over a few years, which means your $3 plant quietly becomes a whole bed at no extra cost. Number 4. Salvia. Salvia is one of the most reliable all-summer bloomers you can put in the ground, and it was right there in that neighbor's yard for a reason. The perennial types send up dense spikes of flowers in deep blue, purple, pink, or red, and they bloom from late spring well into fall. Garden design includes salvias among the full-sun perennials that bloom all summer, and they back that up year after year. Hardiness varies by type, but many hardy salvias are reliable across roughly zones 4 through 9, so it suits a wide swath of the country. What keeps salvia going is its eagerness to rebloom. After the first big flush of spikes fades, shearing the plant back partway triggers a fresh round of bloom, and you can repeat that a couple of times across the season for nearly continuous color. Even without shearing, it flowers for a long stretch on its own. The planting tip is full sun and well-drained soil, because like so many of these tough perennials, it would rather be a little dry than sit in wet ground. The payoff is the pollinators and the resilience. Bees and hummingbirds love the spikes, deer tend to leave the aromatic foliage alone, and the plant sails through heat and drought that would flatten a flat of annuals. If you are starting to see where your gardening money should really be going, do me a favor and subscribe. This channel puts out budget gardening guides like this every week, and there is a lot more coming on getting years of color out of a one-time planting. Number 3. Blanket flower, also called Gaillardia. Blanket flower might be the most cheerful plant on this whole list. It opens in bold rings of red, orange, and yellow, like a little sunset every stem, and it flowers from early summer through fall, sometimes all the way to a hard frost in warmer areas. A 4-inch pot costs about $4 to $6, and it fills out a 2-foot spread by the end of each of its first season. Hardy across roughly zones 310, it is a tough native wildflower that performs best in poor sandy soil with sharp drainage. The long bloom is part of what Gaillardia simply does. It is a relentless flowerer, and giving it the occasional snip of spent blooms keeps it tidy and pushing more, though it keeps going either way. The thing to understand is that this plant rewards you for spending less. Rich soil and a bag of fertilizer actually shorten its life and soften it up, while lean, tough conditions make it bloom longer and harder. So skip the expensive compost, and the Miracle-Gro the Garden Center wants to upsell you for this one. The planting tip is sharp drainage above all, since soggy winter soil is its main enemy. The payoff is a plant that flowers for months, draws butterflies the whole time, and thrives precisely because you left your wallet in your pocket. Number 2. Black-eyed Susan. Black-eyed Susan is the flower that turns a dull late summer yard back into something golden. Rudbeckia produces masses of bright yellow daisies with dark chocolate centers, and it blooms from midsummer through the first hard frost, carrying color into the part of the season when a lot of other flowers are winding down. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, a 1-gallon pot runs about $4 to $6. This is a native wildflower that grows along highway medians, so if it can handle the exhaust and gravel of an interstate shoulder with no irrigation, it can certainly handle your backyard. The reason it blooms so long is that it just keeps cranking out flowers across many weeks, and you do not have to deadhead it to get that. In fact, leaving the dark seed head standing as the blooms fade gives you 2 payoffs in one. Goldfinches strip the seeds through fall and winter, and the plant self-sows a few new seedlings to thicken the patch for next year. So one plant becomes a drift over a couple of seasons with no effort from you. The planting tip is decent drainage, since soggy soil is about the only thing that kills it. The payoff is that long golden bloom in late summer, free birds in winter, and free new plants come spring. Number 1. Catmint. I am ending with catmint, because for a plantodonts, blooms forever flower on a budget, it is hard to beat. Nepeta blooms in waves of soft lavender blue from late spring clear into October, and it does it above fragrant, gray-green foliage that looks good even between flushes. Gardening know-how lists catmint among the perennials that flower without demanding constant deadheading, which is exactly the kind of plant this whole list is built around. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, it costs about $5 to $7 a pot and spreads into a dense, weed-smothering mat within 2 years. Catmint keeps blooming because it reblooms so willingly. It throws a big first flush, and a single shear after that flush fades brings on another full round of flowers, and often another after that, so you get months of blue off one quick haircut a season. Even if you never touch it, you still get a long stretch of bloom plus that handsome foliage. The planting tip is full sun and ordinary, well-drained soil, and to put it where you will brush against it, because the leaves release their scent when touched. The payoff is everything at once. Bees and butterflies swarm it, deer and rabbits leave it alone, and 3 plants spaced along a front path give you a fragrant blooming border for less than a single trip through the garden center checkout line. Now, I told you up front that the right plants keep their promises, and I want to be straight with you about one that needs a footnote. A lot of these lists will hand you the Shasta daisy as an effortless all-summer bloomer, and that is not quite fair to you. The Shasta daisy is a wonderful classic white daisy, hardy across roughly zones 4 through 9, but its natural bloom window is a matter of weeks in midsummer, not the whole season. You can stretch it well into fall, but only by faithfully deadheading the spent flowers, which is real, repeated work. So plant the Shasta for that crisp white daisy look if you love it. Just go in knowing it asks more of your hands than the 10 plants above it. The flowers that truly bloom all summer on their own are the ones we walk through first. That is the whole secret your neighbor never bothered to explain. She did not have a magic thumb. She spent her money once on a handful of plants that come back every spring and flower for months without being fussed over, and then she let them do the work for a decade. You can put any of these in the ground this season and be looking at the same yard, full of color from June to frost, long after the folks down the street have made their 10th trip to buy another tray of annuals. If you want more guides on getting years of beauty and food out of your garden for less, stick around. There is plenty more where this came from.